Good morning, everyone, again, and thank you for coming to the meeting today. As an organizer, I certainly appreciate the turnout. I'm not going to go to, one thing I will say is that as much as I love this picture, it actually makes me look more serious than I actually am. For those of you who have ever interacted with me, and many of you have, you know that I don't put myself on a pedestal. I definitely am engaging, and I work in a practical field, so which means that I connect and I communicate with people all the time, which is how we've been able to, as an organization for Black non-believers, and this is what I model it after, being able to effectively communicate and engage with people, because this is something that I've noticed that is lacking within the secular community. And Jim was right about my background. I'm one of the very fortunate few, from what I understand, to have not been formally raised religious in the Black community. I was born in 1976, which was a very pivotal time in the United States, and within the Black community, there was a sense of wanting to identify with African culture, where our roots were, where people came from, and wanting to learn more about Black history and a certain identity where it wasn't readily available before. So I grew up during that time period, and my parents decided to become a bit more progressive, at that time with my brothers and I. And so, but I am actually I grew up in I wouldn't say poor neighborhood, but I grew up in a housing project. So I didn't come from privilege. I didn't come from what would be considered an elitist background. So I grew up seeing a lot around me. And so I think that also helped shape my outlook and my passion for a sense of progression and communicating with people. It is absolutely true that Richard and I are going to get into a lot of discussion. We're going to have some dialogue. We're going to do a little Q&A session, and then we'll also have Q&A with everyone here. But I think that as more people are questioning and challenging religious belief, as well as dealing with certain historical aspects that come from being a person of color and being very well aware of the issues that affect our community, it will become important. Not all of us, I don't like to project a sense of helplessness, because why we started Black Non-Believers was not because we were just like, here, please accept us. No, we were going to do something about the issues, and also doing something about the very prevalent religious, the prevalence that religion has on the Black community. And so doing it from within and tackling it and challenging it from within was important. And so, we actually serve, we do have we have multi-purposes, but our primary purpose is to help bring out more atheists and non-believers and skeptics in the Black community, because they are there. They are there, but it was just a matter of figuring out how to help better bring them out. And also, too, to combat the diversity issue within the secular community, which is still very much an issue. And so, as we continue, it's not an overnight process. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen quickly. Sometimes it's been painstaking, as Richard can attest to, and Katrina as well. But it is important that we remain consistent and passionate and dedicated, even though it can be extremely difficult. But I think I can say, as a person and as an organization, we have that edge because a good focus is on the people and engaging people, and it doesn't matter who they are, because on some level we can all relate in some way. And I think that is important while discussing and tackling the very issues that affect us. So I just wanted to give that introduction. I'm not sure if Richard wants to say something about the, yeah, I will add that we did form back in January of 2011 on Meetup and Facebook, and I'm happy to say that we have now just established our 8th affiliate in Milwaukee. So we are growing, you know, our visibility is increasing, and our outreach is continuous, and I'm very, very happy about that, and it's something that I'm very passionate about and will continue to do. So if Richard would like to come up and say a few words, then we'll start the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, I am Richard Peacock, the founder and chief organizer of Black NonBelievers of Metro Orlando. We started a year after what was then Black NonBelievers of Atlanta, the formation of that group. And why did I start the group? Before I started the group, there were several years when I was looking for community, and I'm sure what I'm saying is something that everyone's familiar with, right? Regardless of whether you're black or white. But if you're an atheist, you want to find people who are like-minded. And in that time, one thing that stood out to me is that I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me or who had experiences that were like-minded because they didn't look like me. Eventually, I found out about an event, right? And the event was about the National Day of Solidarity for Black NonBelievers. And this guy named Donald Wright was the contact person. And I contacted him, and I expected just to correspond via email, but he sent his phone number and he said, call me. And so for about an hour, we talked, and I initially called him because I was looking for a local event or I should say a local group that was sponsoring the National Day of Solidarity for Black NonBelievers. There was no such group. And so Donald said, well, you know, I don't know anybody in Orlando. He said, I think I might know somebody in Tampa. And I said, you know, Tampa and Orlando, they're not that close. And he said, and he told me, he said, well, it sounds like you may have to start a group. And that's how I got started. Actually, I never set out to start a group. But I guess I reasoned that if I ever wanted to see people who look like me, then maybe I should start a group. So it's been somewhat of an experiment. But even prior to that, I had met Mandisa and other members of Black NonBelievers of Atlanta. That's when it was called Black NonBelievers of Atlanta. And they were very nice and kind and approachable people, and that made a difference. And the reason why I bring that up is because had I not seen the camaraderie, had I not seen the love that they had for each other, the name of our group might be something different. So I thought, well, if I would like to have what they have. So I chose their name in the hopes that I could recreate what they had in Atlanta. Just a little bit more about me. Actually, I was raised a Christian. I'm a former member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, commonly known as the AME Church. It is the oldest, most extensive Black Protestant denomination in the United States and probably the Americas. Perhaps it's ironic that I'm an atheist because I really didn't have any problems with the church. I actually liked the church, but it was when I was in college, some 20 years ago, I became exposed to people of various backgrounds that were different from mine, and some of these people were Black nationalists. Some of them were involved in Black nationalism, and it piqued my interest. in part because there was a critique of Christianity that I was not used to. So I looked into that, and I began to like wonder how it could be that Black people were so religious, yet at the same time suffer as much as they did. Now, I never became a Black nationalist because I'm too progressive to be the kind of Black nationalist that I was exposed to. But for about, I guess you could say about 20 years, I was actually agnostic before I decided to say, well, I'm an atheist, because it just didn't sit well with me, the conditions in which so many Black Christians live. And I didn't want to be a part of something that was an environment in which so many Black people suffered. So I made the decision that I don't want to be a part of that. But anyway, fast forward to 2012, we had our first meetup. Only 2 people came, but I'm glad to say that we have upwards of 100 members now. And at our last meetup, 12 people came. Thank you.
So now we're going to get to, Richard and I decided on doing a question and answer period where we ask each other questions and then we give answers. And then afterwards, then we'll have a Q&A session. So the first question, and this is something, and these are questions that we came up with as a result of the questions that we tend to get when we appear at different events or online, whenever there's information about our groups presented. These are very common questions that we get. And so the first question is, why is there a need for Black atheist / humanist groups? You know, of course, there are various groups within the secular community. You have the student groups, you have the humanist groups, you have the atheist groups, you have the skeptics groups. So there's a variety in the community. However, when it comes to the establishment for groups for people of color, and when they have Black in it, you know, we tend to get a very different and not so very pleasant response sometimes from these folks. So the first question would be, why is there a need for Black atheists and humanist groups for those who, you know, just aren't aware?
Well, I'll just say, based on my personal experience, well, one, because we are Black, there are things that we experience that other people don't experience, and there are things that we experience acutely, right? One thing that when I had come out, so to speak, as an atheist, and when I was online, what I noticed is that when I would post things in different forums regarding Black people, no one would talk to me. And I just wanted to talk to somebody. And so I don't have that problem. I go to a Black atheist group, okay? But I want to make clear, however, that I'm involved in a lot of groups. My involvement is not exclusively with Black NonBelievers. It wouldn't help me or anybody if I didn't involve myself with other groups. So having said that, it is sometimes nice to talk to someone who's experienced what you have experienced, who can relate. However, this doesn't mean that we don't invite people to speak with us about our experiences, because I think I can speak for both of us. We do. We actually encourage that. I think that by doing that, that allows us to bridge with the other groups.
Yeah, and for me to answer that question, I remember speaking with a philosophy class at Morehouse College. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Morehouse, it is a historically Black college in the Atlanta. Yeah, it is in the Atlanta area. And the irony was that the professor was white. He is a member of our group, and he invited me to speak. When I asked the class how many of them are still religious or still go to church, the entire class's hand went up, that their hands went up. And so the feedback that the professor received was that I was the first Black atheist they had ever come in contact with. And so in our community, that is a problem, because yes, it is predominantly many Blacks identify as being religious. There is a lot of just ignorance about atheism, what an atheist is, and the fact that a Black person can be one. And so there was a need, and I was saying that part of the reason why there are very few Blacks within secular groups isn't only because there is a good need to identify with people who look like us, but also that there are many who don't think it's possible to even be an atheist, or that they aren't sure that they are atheists. And sometimes it takes for them to see other Blacks that are atheists and that are non-believers, because that helps ease that stigma a whole lot better than just honestly a white person saying, hey, I'm white and atheist. And sometimes that is the expectation of, okay, well, we expect you to be atheist. Yep. But for somebody that's Black and atheist, it's like, wow, wait a minute. It gives it a spin. And so this is what we need to do to challenge those perceptions in our own communities. So it isn't that we are just trying to buck the secular system. There was a identified need for it to be in our own communities as well. So like I said, we're battling dual issues here.
Yep. And if I could piggyback on that, sometimes what you have is what I call an out of sight and therefore out of mind mentality, right? If you don't see it, you can't imagine it. And that goes for white people, including white atheists, right? If they've never seen a Black atheist, they can't imagine a Black atheist. Similarly, if Black people never seen a Black atheist, they can't imagine it. I think what happens to us sometimes is that when we say that we're atheists, one of the responses that we get sometimes, not always, is, why do you want to be white?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? All right, and so and then when that comes up, we have an opportunity to educate and inform, and I can say I am a former member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, 4th generation, right? And so when that happens, we can educate. And it's not to say that if you were white or Latino that you can do the same thing, but it can make a difference when there is a Black person who's able to articulate what atheism is.
So the second question.
All right, and this kind of dovetails with what we've been talking to. Talk about whether or not the groups are separatist in nature.
Black non-believers is not.
Please repeat the question.
Are such groups such as ours, are they separatists in nature?
Meaning that we only encourage Black participation?
Yes.
Are we separatists?
Yes.
We don't. Black non-believers does not. I will be honest and say that we've encountered some fringe folks and groups that are. And it's unfortunate though, and this is the Black nationalism that we speak of, that many of Black nationalists, and I was raised in that community, is that I had to unlearn this idea of hating white people, that all white people are responsible for the conditions that Black folks are in today. And I had to learn to separate that, from individuals, because believe it or not, that is what many in those communities perpetuate. Now, we're still hearing a lot of the same rhetoric that we heard back in the 50s and in the 70s when the Black Power movement was very prevalent. And so now we're seeing there's been a lot of progression since then. And so while there are still many issues, we do not deny that racism still exists. You'd be a fool if you did. That sexism doesn't exist. Classism doesn't exist. the need for, for groups and for certain causes. It is important. However, we maintain that it is possible for all of us to work together without being nasty towards each other, and also having historical information and facts correct, and making sure that we're educating and informing as to why it's necessary. Unfortunately, I can't speak for everyone else, because there are some who use it as a tool to be combative and to be separatist. But I will say that our groups, we don't encourage that, and in fact, we do participate with our local coalitions. I am the coordinator for the Atlanta Area Coalition of Reason that launched last year. We do collaborate with the Atlanta Free Thought Society. We are affiliates of American Atheists. We do participate and collaborate with a lot of organizations, and we do participate in many events, because it is important and it's necessary to show, like Richard said, that we are focused on working together. And in fact, like Richard said, it wasn't my intention to start Black NonBelievers. I actually participated in one of the meetups in the Atlanta area, and so, but I had heard some feedback from other Black atheists about that sense of isolation and that sense of awkwardness that comes along with attending predominantly white meetups. And I had to experience it for myself, because I did hear that, wow, I've never met a Black atheist at this particular meetup from another white person. And it was like, well, I mean, we are out here, but so there are things that we do experience that others necessarily wouldn't. But are we separatist in nature? Absolutely not. No, we are not.
And just to add to what she said, I think the way we look at it actually it would behoove us to want to have alliances. Mm-hmm. And as far as my group is concerned, I think one of the reasons why I've had success is that I've had other groups that were susceptible to what we were doing. They understood our vision, and so from time to time they would encounter, or these members of these other groups, they would meet a Black person who identifies atheist, agnostic, etc., and said, "Have you heard of Black NonBelievers?" Right? And also when there are like events like the free flow, a conference, right? That's a time when, now that I have like 100 members, where I can actually tap into my membership to help them organize that event, to provide volunteers for them, right? And I think generally it's been kind of a reciprocal effect, because I am involved with other groups. And it's just pragmatic as well, is to have alliances. And they have some things that we don't have, and we might have some things that they don't have. And it's nice when you can, send someone a message and say, hey, can we meet at this location? We need a spot. Yeah, right? So it just makes sense to have that kind of, just to establish those kinds of relationships.
So the third question that we get, and this is something that, this is more along the lines of what people understand why we're here. Why is the Black community so religious? And
we just talk all day about
yeah, no, that's a totally different, that's a separate meeting. But in a nutshell, and I know we'll try to break this down, is that the start of Blacks being so religious in the United States started with the transatlantic slave trade and slavery in this country, and having to adopt the the Christianity of what was here in the United States. And now there were some slaves that were allowed to keep their their traditional religions. There were the captives did have religions that they brought over, and practices that they brought over from from Africa, from where they previously were. And I think this is something that is inherent to pretty much any country or society that was enslaved. You had to adopt the religion of your captor, of your captor. And so many, at first, if you resisted, you died or something very bad happened to you. So it was the onset of slavery in this country that it was used to justify the conditions and enslaving blacks in this country. And so, but after slavery ended, the church was very instrumental in establishing schools or educational institutions and providing a sense of support for the community when, after slavery ended, there were very, very turbulent times, which is describing it mildly, for blacks. After a while, after slavery ended, there was a period of Reconstruction where there was black progress, but then you had the Klan being formed, and then you had the Jim Crow laws being enacted, which disenfranchised the black community. And so when you have laws in place that limit people's rights, you have this institution that was able to step in and provide that sense of support, if you will. And so there is an emotional tie to the church because of those reasons. And so people tend to ignore the very bad stuff that's in the Bible, or they don't read the Bible at all. And I should say that it is very, one point that we are, that I know I tend to make is that, during slavery, it was illegal to teach slaves to read and write. But the only book that was allowed to be interpreted was the Bible. So that should say something about, about reinforcing this sense of submission. And there's a very strong correlation to it, not necessarily being emotionally and mentally good for us. So that's, but there is very much an emotional tie because some people did only have their belief to get them through hard times. Even though the communities did band together, that was pretty much the binding, that was the binding institution.
And just to add to that, when we think about the Black American experience, it wasn't until, recall, the 20th century that we got, even with the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments, right, that have to do with slavery. It wasn't until even until the 1960s, I think we've seen Selma, that Black people were still trying to get rights. Mm-hmm. And you keep arguing in 2015 that we're still trying to get rights. And so in that long time period, the church has always been a place that we could go to, at least that's the assumption or the belief, and feel free and feel validated and feel like a human being, right? Yeah, we can knock the church, the Christian church, for many things, but for a lot of people, especially a lot of people in the Black community, it has been for hundreds of years one of the only places where they could feel validated as a human being, which it may seem ironic considering how church is brought to us, right? And so that narrative about the church being this place where I'm a child of God, daughter of God, right? That's been passed down for generations. And you even have Black people who are not regular churchgoers, but they know that particular narrative about the church. They don't even read the Bible, but mom or dad or someone else, or the television, or what they hear in the beauty salon and the barbershop, continues to perpetuate the church as this place where they are a child of God, they are a human being. So that's part of it, and I guess you could argue that the church there's a psychological component that has